Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Welcome back to Published. Today we'll be speaking with Terrie Wolf, literary agent and rights manager at AKA Literary Management. If you want your book to be read around the world, there's a good chance you'll need to publish versions in different territories and also have your book translated into other languages. In this episode, Terrie will explain the difference between foreign and translation rights, how to negotiate with publishers outside of your territory, and what an author should know if they want to publish internationally. If you enjoy our show, please take a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now. It means a lot to have your feedback, and it helps us to make sure we are answering your publishing questions. Now let's dive into the interview. Terrie, welcome to Published.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you today. We're talking about something very new for this show and something I think will be of great interest to our authors. So why don't we have you start off by telling us a little bit about you and what you do?
My name is Terrie Wolf. I manage AKA Literary Management. I am a literary agent and rights manager. So that means that I can do anything across the board, from movie rights to translation rights to foreign rights to serialization, anything that's in those contracts that people are afraid of. That's what I manage. So,
so let's talk specifically about the foreign rights piece that you just mentioned, or translation rights. So this is something that a lot of authors have a lot of questions about, and I think there can be a lot of confusion here. So why don't we start by just clarifying the difference there? Foreign rights, translation rights, what's the difference? How do these play out, I guess, in your contracts world?
So some people call translation rights sort of an overall term, as do they call foreign rights an overall term. Foreign rights implies, obviously, that it's not a domestic sale. So it could be anywhere from Canada to Venezuela. It could be anywhere you can think of that is taking books. That would be foreign rights. Translation rights, on the other hand, would be if I'm translating it into another language. So that's kind of the long and short of it. Further, with foreign rights, I can do anything. I can do film rights. I can do, there again, serializations. I can do anything. A lot of times I'll work with a company in that given territory, we'll say. And perhaps, an example would be like Czechoslovakia. I do not speak Czechoslovakian well. So I have people who help me there, and we do all that we can to shop rights, whatever they might be.
So foreign rights were potentially then selling the English language version just in different territories.
Right. The other side of it is that much of the time when we talk about foreign licensing or translation licensing, sometimes it's coming back into this country. Mm-hmm. So that might be, if we have a book coming from, I'll just say, South Korea, that would obviously need translation rights. And I'll tell you, for every agent that does what we do, they have a different definition. It's because it just depends upon what we're doing, how we're doing it, with whom we're dealing, so on and so forth. So,
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, who negotiates these rights for an author?
It can depend. So if I'm working with a small house, one of the first things I look at is whether or not they're doing their own foreign rights. There are a lot of mid-sized and even small houses and even large houses that tend to try and do everything on their own. And that's great. So if you think about sort of the big five, that kind of thing, they obviously have big rights departments. Several people working that will always be there. They know what they're doing. They're on the ground all the time, every fair, every opportunity. And they have great connections, certainly. Mid-sized publishers usually are working in that direction, or they have someone like me. Small houses, I would give it about a half and half. I always look to see, number one, are they shopping their own rights? And number two, are they doing it well? So if they have, we'll just say 10 authors, and they've had the foreign rights or the rights capability for, we'll say 3 or 4 years, and nothing's happened, that's when I say, look, can I give it a shot? Let me see what I can do. More likely than not, I probably have a lot more contacts than they do, and I have more time. Foreign rights is not necessarily their first piece of cake. So getting the book published, getting the work marketed, so on and so forth. As you know, that's kind of the big part of the cake. So I just take it from there and see how we can work.
Have you witnessed, I guess, situations where an author is managing their own foreign rights? And I imagine you probably have some strong feelings about this, if so.
No, not really. No, there are some people who have indeed independently published and who have done pretty well, I have to say. I'm one of those people. I think we're all playing in the same pool, so we should be kind to one another. And I love meeting with them and talking and finding out, wow, how did you do this? What was who did you talk to, and how did this happen? It depends upon what you're looking for as an author. So if you're looking for, I want to sell in, and I'll just say Germany and France, you might be able to. If you're wanting to go broad, more likely than not, you're going to have to make those connections. But I have to say there are some independently published authors who have done exceedingly well in all markets, actually. So I can't put them down for it.
Good. That's a lot of work. So yes, I will go
It
commend
is
them.
a lot of work, yeah, and it does. I have to say, when they do it, it does. There again, it takes away from that first thing on their list, which is to sell their book. So
Let me use Greenleaf as an example. So we obviously are producing primarily English language books. We do have a few Spanish titles. And then we distribute those not only domestically, but into the UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. So we have I guess, the foreign distribution already in place. Is there a reason then that would the titles on our list benefit from different editions in any of those territories?
Sure, absolutely. I'll give you an example. I worked on one that was published in France, and it was published in French, if you will. I ended up selling also the rights to a company in Marseille. The French is just like here. There's a dialect difference, and so they took those rights, and then from there we took them on to Austria and to Switzerland. So it was a different way to do things. It's not that French is so different, but by the same token, French Canadian is a little bit different than French in France. And that's why you call it a territory over a country. I know that I have one where I sold to most of Northern Africa and the Saudi countries, that kind of thing, United Emirates, so on and so forth. And it was a book that there were certain places where it couldn't be sold because of belief systems and so on and so forth. But boy, there sure were a bunch of countries in there that got to see it. So it just kind of depends on where you're at and what you're doing, and the material within the book. So you have to think about who we are in the world and what the world is experiencing as well. So, and there probably isn't a one way to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
complicated.
Mhm.
So going back to, let's think about the authors who are listening to us today on this podcast and maybe thinking about getting very excited usually about translation rights and possibilities there. How do they go about finding and hiring someone to help them with this?
This is a pretty small community, to be honest. Next week, I'll be coming up to London Book Fair, and next week I'll be getting ready for all of the people I'll be meeting with. So I can tell you right now, I think off the top of my head, for Book Fair, I already have scheduled, about 300 meetings.
Wow.
So there are a lot of people in this industry, but there aren't very many people who are, let's say there are certain people who represent romance, people who represent business, people who represent nonfiction of different sorts. And by the same token, there are companies who want those things. So you do get to know one another quite well. And so if, let's just say that you have a business book, you would come to someone who, like me, who represents nonfiction. I'm always meeting people. I'm fascinated by the number of people who want American properties. It's very exciting to realize that there's a whole world out there, and our books can be a part of them. So that world and their marketing program and their list, so to speak. There's nothing. Just the other day I was looking up a book that I represent, and I sold rights in Poland, and there it was in their catalog online, and it's just such a great feeling to realize, wow, look, there they are, they're there. So, and it was a business book of all things. So that excited me quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I always find it so fun to get those first copies of the translated version and to see what they've done with the cover. Sometimes they just sort of riff on the existing cover, and other
Right,
times it's like,
right.
wow, I've completely reimagined it, and it's very
Completely.
interesting.
Hmm. I find that the Asian countries tend to do a really beautiful, very artistic job. I did a foreign right transaction with the Philippines, and they actually had sort of a gold deckled edge, and the pages were deckled, and it was just the most beautiful book. And truthfully, what they got was a paperback, and they made it so beautiful. And I thought, oh my gosh, every book needs to be this beautiful. So, you know,
I love
sometimes
it.
they beat us in our own game.
Sure, it sounds like they put a lot of care into that one.
Right.
As our listeners are trying to find someone who specializes in their genre, let's say, is there a directory or like an online resource that they might access to start their research?
Probably because I'm certainly biased. I would say to go to AALA, American Association of Literary Agents. When you go, every one of them list whether or not they do foreign rights. You could go to the different fairs. The London fair will tell you who's going to be there. Frankfurt certainly. The Philippine market. There are so many fairs where people go, and there's that directory where you can look people up and that sort of thing. They can tell you right away whether or not they believe it will sell. Sometimes you have to move around a bit to see what will work with their list as well.
And on that subject, so how do you personally decide or look at something and say, yes, I think it will sell or travel well, as we sometimes put it when we're thinking about foreign rights? Are there certain genres or subjects that, as a rule, do better or don't?
I wish I could tell you yes. I would tell you a couple years ago it was that way. For a long time, the Scandinavians had the market in mystery, for example. I mean, there was that little book about the girl something with the dragon tattoo, I think it was. And everybody wanted those books. And we learned that they cornered that market for a long time. So I truthfully didn't sell a lot of mystery at that time. You kind of have to view it from their side of the fence, so to speak. So if they don't want, we'll just say if they don't want guns involved, then I probably can't sell quite a few of the mysteries that we represent. If they are in a communistic country, they're probably not going to want a lot of business books that talk about the freedom to do what you please. It doesn't mean that they don't want to learn. It just means they probably can't acquire it. So, I mean, one of the things that I do when I'm at book fairs, I talk with hundreds of publishers and learn what they can take. It's more about what they can do versus what I can't do. The other part of it is, I think sometimes if the book really gets to me and it makes me think, if it makes me think, oh, and most of the time I can say, this would go really well in somewhere. And usually I'm right. I mean, just because you know what their world systems are, we work, foreign rights agents are always looking at what's going on in the world. So, interestingly, books about politics, that's not quite so popular, but books about business, books about empowerment, books about bettering yourself in any way. I've had incredible luck with craft books. And people want to know what other people are doing. So one of my most popular of all subjects, which is a little strange, though, is books on running, books on climbing, and books on biking. People love travel and they want to know what that world is like out there. So those seem to work quite well. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it's still the case, but some years ago, I was hearing a glut of horror stories from authors who basically, as I understood it, they would sell their rights to a specific territory. And in this case, it was India that I'm remembering. And then they would see these unauthorized, differently translated versions of that book when they went to the book fair or some other ways they discovered
Mhm.
a book that
Mhm.
they had no part or gave no permission to produce.
Mhm.
So, can you perhaps speak to the circumstances under which that might occur? And are there certain countries that an author or an agent would avoid because they're riskier than others in terms of their interpretation of copyright?
Everybody has their own rules. So walking into that country, I have to say, what are your rules? And I have to understand them quite vividly. I always present to the authors and or publishers that I'm dealing with, this is what they'll take, this is what they expect, this is what they'll do. I think a lot of the time we're we're expecting them to behave the way we behave, which we know is just poor form on our part. But that has happened. It has happened. I think as time has gone on and foreign rights have become much more popular, people watch out for one another. I know we did a book about the same time. I had published a coloring book for adults with a company, and it was at that height of the whole thing. And there was an author who had become quite famous for her work doing those books. And I was in Philippines, and I walked down an aisle, and here was this book. Well, that was the one book that she had not given permission to do rights. And it was only because it was too new. She was waiting just a bit. And I'll never forget walking down the aisle, and they had just the cover. And when you opened it up, there was nothing in it.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So when they have the cover, how did they do that? And two, what are they going to put in there for content? And when I asked, the response I got was, well, we're hoping that this becomes our book. So, I mean, it wasn't so much a case of pirating as it was a case of wishful thinking, pretty much. And no, they didn't get the rights to it. So, so the first thing I did was I actually called the publisher in the United States, and I said, I just need to let you know about this. And, and that's, I think truly we look after one another. Nobody's out to take advantage of anyone. Of course, there are people who are more forceful. There are those bulldog agents and publishers who want this right now. But I haven't really run into that. So I'm sure there are people who face it on a daily basis. But as for countries to stay away from or places to stay away from, some people have obvious feelings right now, of course, with world events. So some people would say stay away from those places. I've done, since the start of the Ukrainian conflict, I've sold Ukrainian rights. I don't know. I'm trying to think here. Probably, I'm going to say 9. I think 9 books. So the Ukrainians definitely want to read. They're definitely in need of reading material, as are, by the way, Russians. So if it's not political, if it's not, if it's in any way edifying, I think those books are okay. But I know agents that won't deal with them because it's a longer wait time. It's a longer production time. So this is just something we have to face.
That's the benefit of having an established agent. The good publishers and
Right.
where authors' work is safe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and from time to time, you'll find somebody who is having a problem. I know that every so often, not too long ago, I had to do a cease and desist on a publisher who, number one, was not paying advances. Number two was not paying royalties. Number three was not contacting us to let us know when the book is going to be published or how that process is going on. And when you get to know your little, it's almost like a little tribe of people that you work with, and you know what they want, their business actions, so to speak, their practices and their flow. And so when you're not hearing something back, that's when you start to investigate a little bit more fully. So, I mean, that's not that much different than doing work here in the United States, or I'll say in North America. But it's a little different, sure. Every so often, people are having issues. I had a publisher in the Middle East who, because of political situations, he was unable to make an advance payment because they were not recognizing currency at that point. So he could send it, but it wouldn't be received here. So, we waited it out. Things happen. That's international business.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
So you mentioned royalties and advances. Let's talk about that a little bit so that authors can maybe get a baseline understanding of what they might expect. So I know that surely it varies widely, but maybe you can kind of give us a general feel for what you're probably going to just look at me like I'm crazy, but is there like a typical advance, a typical royalty, maybe even a typical length of time that this book would be under contract, or kind of talk us through the particulars of what
Sure.
that agreement is like?
Things have changed a lot since pandemic. I think not only, of course, in this realm, but in everything. It took books and companies and everyone dealing with the publishing industry a long time to recover. So, for example, I can remember when I worked with a company in Italy, and they produce beautiful books. I love working with them. They are exhilarating, to say the least. They have great ideas. They pay very well. They report very well, which is important. And then, of course, we had this thing that happened. And I can remember when they were publishing about 100 books per quarter, or season, I should say. There they call it, some people call it quarter, some people call it season, but so give or take about 100 books per, so about 500 books a year. And they were down to, I'm not joking, they were down to about 2 books per season. So
Wow.
they were hit in terrible ways. We also experienced, of course, that shortage, that supply chain. Well, we were experiencing it. So was the rest of the world. So, for example, I had a book that was going to France, and they couldn't do it because the only paper that they could acquire was sort of the stuff that we would put a formal resume on. Well, as you can imagine, that would be very expensive to produce books on that. So we had to wait until they started getting paper. And the problem with that was that then they started getting sort of that onion skin paper, that very thin paper. So, and they would laugh about it. The French laugh and they say, oh, this is, c'est la vie. This is the way it works. But, the American was not so happy. So I was not quite so patient. I think things have changed. I'm watching things kind of roll back around. I don't believe that advances are as high as they used to be. And these, I'm talking about the larger countries. Uh, 5 years ago, I could have expected maybe, who knows, a 5 to 20,000 euro advance. Now it would be maybe, about a 2 to 10,000 euro advance. It just depends. It depends upon the company, what they've endured, how well they've recovered. So there's not really a hard, fast answer on that. And as for terms, usually it's 3, 5, 7, or 10 years. And if you do a 3-year term, that means that they get 3 years to publish it and promote it. Normally at the end of that 3 years, if they're receiving good sales, just like an American company or a North American company, they would then ask to renew that contract, probably for another 3 years. As for royalties, I used to rely on about somewhere between about 9 and 15% for royalties. I'm seeing a lot of offers for 6 right now. 6% is not a lot. I actually received an offer a couple weeks ago that was no advance, royalties of 4%, and a print run of 1,000, which is not many books. Most of the time, you're looking at at least 2,500, more likely 5,000 or more. So they certainly other countries are a little more frugal than we when it comes to books. So that's something that we have to look at.
Yeah, and different market dynamics at play, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Interesting. This is a question that I think comes up a lot. For that translated work, who owns the copyright?
The author owns the copyright always. So, and it says in the book, there's this little phrase in English which is so funny. In the middle of a book produced in Japan, it's still in English, and so always the author. So and that's one of the things that I make sure of, is that when I receive that final proof, there it is. And people get confused by that because they think, well, wait a second, we translated it, we should get the rights. No, not the way it works.
Yeah, good. And do you have a ballpark feel for how many books end up moving into that place we all want to be of earning royalties?
I would like to say about 40% actually made it. And I'm not going to say they were huge royalties. I'm not going to say that they were huge advances, but it's that I always consider the foreign market to be kind of the icing on the cake, so to speak. First you have your domestically published work, and the way that you do it, to do it in countries like the UK and Australia, so on and so forth, I consider that almost domestic, even though it's not. And so those are the royalties that you think about. And then when these other things come along, it's number one, it's really fun. And number two, it's really interesting when you have that book sitting, on your coffee table, and somebody says, well, I didn't know that you spoke Portuguese. Well, I don't, but it's my book, and so people have them lined up, and it's very exciting. So that's probably the best part of it.
Yeah, I have one author who really got a kick out of how the Latvian version of his book modified his name. So his name actually read to be like the Latvian interpretation. And
Right.
it was this running joke of I'm huge in Latvia.
Yeah, yeah. I am so big. I'm so, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Latvian readers, I have to tell you, they spend a lot on books. And
Good
so
for
people tease me when I say, we have Latvian rights. I'm always excited about it. And they kind of go, oh, because this is a good thing. Yes, this is a very good thing. I mean, so and a lot of times, it moves out from there. We have to think about where those countries are located. Almost always, if I'm doing German rights, I can almost always do other, Danish rights, Dutch rights, Belgian rights, and because they see the book, they want the book. So it's not a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned reporting a little bit back. What should an author expect? How much visibility will they have in this process and how the book is selling and the promotion and so forth? Is it sort of you sign the deal and then you're out of the picture, or typically what can they expect?
Actually, I sign the deal for them a lot of the time, and uh, I keep them as apprised as possible. When I find out it's on the website, for example, or it's gone into the catalog or that kind of thing, I always send them information, go here, look, look, look. And it's always an exciting moment because something's happening. I think it's kind of like here when we find out that our works they've entered the Amazon space or wherever else. I saw my book at Target, it's that kind of thing. I would like to say that foreign markets are as good about royalty statements per se, or any kind of news as domestic publishers. Some are, some aren't. And part of that is because it's a different mindset. And they know that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They'll let us know when they have any kind of news, and that's it. Whereas us, we're very into reporting and we're very into keeping people aware. So you kind of have to juggle the two.
Yeah. But typically they might expect, let's say, an annual report on how it's
They
doing.
should. Mhm.
Yeah.
They should expect an annual. I can tell you that there are certain countries that I never receive. And when I go back and say, gosh, I don't have a royalty statement and I'm wondering what's happened. Oh, we'll get it to you.
So you've done this for a while now. Can you maybe share some stories for our listeners of authors who have benefited from publishing internationally?
I think everybody publishes internationally and receives benefits, to be honest. I think it's a way of opening our eyes to that world out there. We forget that there's more to it than us. I have one author who is published in, let's see, 9 territories, and I'm not going to tell you that the advances have been huge or that the royalties have been even significant, but I receive letters from people saying, I love this book. So if that's happening, I know it's a good thing. And trying to think of really great stories. I have one right now, and there you go. We talked about Latvia. I just yesterday sold Slovenian rights for one of my authors. And there again, you think, oh, what does that mean? Well, it means that people are reading our books. So I don't, I'm less concerned with which story, I guess I should say, and more concerned with the fact that how are we affecting the world? What are we bringing to the world that no one else is bringing? That's kind of my focus. And by the same token, there are some amazing books out there from authors elsewhere. And what do we need to see? That's something that I'm always thinking about as well. So it's all successful. That's the truth of it.
Are there cases where, let's say for our business authors, having that book translated into another country leads to, many of them are using the book to drive their business, right? Speaking or consulting. Have you seen something like that happen? I know the language barrier might prevent that.
I don't think it's a language barrier as much as the belief systems.
Mhm.
So there again, if you're dealing with people who do not understand what we talk about with the bottom line and return on investment, they do, but they just call it something different, or they may not. The terminology is different. So I have seen actually, and I don't know if I should be mentioning authors. I'm really happy with one of the authors that I'm working with that you published, and He's doing exceedingly well. He just doesn't know it yet because it's all at the deal stage. And I'm so excited when that happens. I mean, he has, I don't know, 4 deals just holding right now. And another, I'm going to say off the top of my head, 12, 11 or 12 that boom, these people are going to be reading his words and applying it to their business practices. So how could that not be a positive thing?
I can mention his name. This will be Scott Ettinger.
It
And
is
so he's the
absolutely.
growth leader, and his book was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. Is that
Yes.
something that drives interest internationally? I mean, it's
You know,
gone, bummer, but
I know. The funniest thing about it is that when Scott's book was originally released, I had, I can't tell you how many people on the line. I was really, really excited about the interest I was seeing. And then we had things happen, of course, with, world events, so on and so forth. And that was a little frustrating. It remains to be certainly a little frustrating. And the good news is that, if it's meant to happen, it'll happen. And just going by his principles, uh, the whole idea is to be a growth leader. So you don't think about those things that didn't work out so well. You think about this is what's going to work and this is why it's going to work. And his reading his book quite literally changed the way I do business. So I knew when I was given the opportunity to represent it, I was overjoyed. I remain overjoyed, and I'm excited by the number of people who are now starting to kind of grasp the ideas. Whereas before, I mean, I think maybe we didn't want to talk about business for a while. Maybe we were afraid of it even as a world unit, and because what was working, so many businesses had shut down, so many businesses had gone away due to world events. Suddenly now we're thinking, and I wouldn't say suddenly, but I'd say over about the last 4 or 5 months, we're really thinking about how we're doing business and why we're doing business. Sustainability is an issue, carbon footprint, things like that. Uh, those sorts of books that have been published on those items have become incredibly popular. And so, I mean, I think we have to think about how do we want to affect the world? What are we out to show? And
well, you've shared so much interesting information with us today about all things rights related. Do you have any parting advice for the folks listening?
parting thoughts. I would say number one, believe. Number two, believe. Number three, believe. The right thing happens. And when you have that team working with you, I think that's the most important thing. You are not an island. And I think that takes authors a lot to hand over a book and say, please go sell it to the world. Because when I say the world, I truly mean the world. Sometimes an author means, could you sell it maybe in Latvia? I mean, who knows? But it's make sure that you're understanding the process and the meaning that your book is going to be read somewhere else in the world. I think that's the best part of it. There is no down on this. There is no downside whatsoever. It's all, most of the time, it's nothing but good news. You asked me about success stories, and I sold one work, a very well-known textile artist, and of all things, they had a book signing party for her. And how fun, they took her to Germany, and 5 different places in Germany she signed books. Who would have ever thought such a thing? So those things do happen, and book sales, of course, here do help. Um, but it's okay. I mean, they are looking certainly for books that have sold well. But every so often one slips through that maybe isn't selling 1 million copies, but has sold, oh, I don't know, a few thousand. And uh, their likes are not necessarily our likes. So we have to remember that just because we think a book is the ultimate, they may or may not. So it's keeping an open mind and believing some more. That's where I end it.
Awesome. Great advice, Terrie. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your wisdom. It's been
Oh, thank
really
you.
informative.
Oh, thanks for having me. I wish everyone well, and I wish them well publication wherever they are and wherever they want to be.
That's it for our episode today with Terrie. We hope you enjoyed learning about publishing a book internationally. For notes and resources from today's show, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 84. You can also find advice for writing, publishing, and promoting your work in my book, Ideas, Influence, and Income, which you can learn more about at ideasinfluenceandincome.com. A big thank you to Madison Johnson, who produces the Published podcast, and to our 5-star reviewers. Thank you for your support, and we will be back with another episode on the last Tuesday of next month.